Hello everybody, this is this follow-up to the video for the pellet stove, basically how to wire the whole home generator. Going to be working in the breaker panel over here. We got the generator on the floor, and I'll kind of go in a little bit more depth, some of the stuff that goes into that. So this is the generator that I have. I got it at Northern Tool. They had a pretty good discount on it. This one is set up for its electric start, shut off the fuel when you're not using it. It's got a 30 amp main breaker. It's got a neutral bond to the frame. You have your 120/240 AC at 30 amps. You have straight 120 at 30 amps. And then you have two GFCI protected 120 outlets, 20 amps. All right, so here's the power cord that I use. It's basically a twist lock. Picked this up at Lowe's. Pretty self-explanatory. It's got the twist lock fittings. Basically, once you wire it properly, you cannot install this or wire it incorrectly. The plugs go together and then the twist to lock in. Pretty simple, but it's a heavy-duty cable. It's specifically set up for a generator. You can find it at Lowe's. Basically, as you take a look, any of your double breakers are 240 volt breakers primarily. So you're talking about your oven, your furnace, your AC, your second furnace, dryer, so on and so forth. Your single pole breakers are 120 fed. So basically all I did was I had this blank opening, right? I had 3 available slots left. All I did was remove the knockouts. I went and got me a double pole 30 amp breaker. Now when you're using 30 amp, you have to use the proper wire. You have to gauge your wire properly in order so you do not overheat it. And all I went and did was basically, this is 10-3 wire. So there's actually 4 wires in it. I don't know if you can really see that. You've got a black wire, a red wire, a white wire, and then a bare copper. So your black and your red are your hots. That gives you 120 and 120 for 240. Remember, the generator has a 120/240 volt at 30 amp. Also protecting the system, I went with a straight 30 amp breaker, so I'm not overloading the system. If I do overload it, breaker catches it, trips, protects everything. And then in the garage here in Texas, the walls aren't insulated. So all I did was basically come down straight below in the stud cavity. I measured out a knockout, and all you have to do is get an old work box at any of your big box stores. They'll have them all. I went with a double gang because 10 gauge wire is pretty hard to work with. Just got a basic cover. And all you do is you measure out the hole in the drywall for the exact same size as the box. You slide the box inside of it, and there's a screw on the top right and the lower left. And all that does is it flips a wing that catches and pinches that drywall. Inside the box, there are knockouts. So all I did was, it's hard to get without cutting into your drywall. Now, can you do it? Yes, from here, because your flange on your box covers and protects. All right, so now we have the panel off. You can see here I have 30 amp breaker installed with a double pole. You got your red wire, like I was showing you earlier. In the 10-3 wire, there's actually 4 wires that come through. Your red and your black are hot. They tie directly to your breaker. Your white comes up here and ties into your neutral bus bar along with your ground. Ground gets bonded to neutral, probably in Texas, I'm not for certain of the code, but probably either at the meter. So that's where your neutral and your ground get tied together. Like I said earlier, I've marked all of my 120 breakers with a white dot. So that way, if I'm not here, my wife, she'll know exactly what to do and have a set of instructions on how to turn off the breakers that she needs and turn on the ones that she needs to power the house. That will include also powering the pellet stove, which with the backup generator will provide enough electricity to heat the home even when we got inclement weather down here. This is where your main power comes in from the grid. This is your main breaker. This is a 200 amp breaker on this service. So I have a 200 amp service coming into the house. You got your 4-aught cables that come up, tie in, power gets fed through the breaker, and then down the bus bars on both sides where your breakers tie in. Like I was saying, these are your double pole, these are your 240 volt breakers. These are 120 volt breakers. Then I have my 240 volt back feed for my panel. And that's all it's gonna do, is I'm gonna cut this main breaker, and then I'm gonna turn this breaker on once I have my generator set up. So as opposed to powering my panel from the grid, I'm powering my panel backwards, kind of like water, backwards through this breaker, which will power these bus bars, but it will not go any farther. And I'll explain a little bit more when we get into it. Basically, with that cord that I bought, it has a male and a female plug. They don't sell a receptacle plug that has a male end on it, so I had to make a jumper cable. Basically, I just took a chunk of the 10-3 wire, and I got two of the 30 amp 120 240 volt plugs. You can see on the end of it, it has 4 different prongs on both sides. So basically, inside of this thing, you're going to have one lug that is green, one lug that the screw is silver, and then 2 that are gold. So the golds are your hot, the silver is your white neutral, and then the green obviously your ground. And you're just going to tie them, one plug on one end, one plug on the other, so that way when we take our the female end of our extension cord, because on the generator, remember, it has a female end, so you have to put the male end of the generator. That leaves you with your extension cord having the female end. Also on the house, we have a female receptacle plug that we wired in. So that way you can't tie 2 female ends together, so thus we had to make a jumper. So we have a male end that ties into the extension cord, and the male end that'll tie into the home receptacle. So what I'm doing right now is you always want to make sure that you've got everything properly grounded. So with the grounding lug that we have on the generator, I just bought some clamps that I can attach to it. And I'm going to take a grounding wire and I'm going to feed it in through. That way my generator is grounded to my meter panel. And you're going to take your jumper cable that you built. You're going to go into your 120 240. Now if you take a look at it, you'll see how one lug has a little a fin on the side of it. That way it ensures that you can only put this in one way. I'm just going to put it in, wiggle it around, and then twist it, and that locks it in. Then we'll take our extension cord that we got. Bear with me, it's windy out here, so I'm going to drop that over the fence. Once we got our extension cord hooked up, we got our ground wire both running up over the fence. And what I'll end up doing is I'm going to tape those two together so they're at the right lengths. As we go on the other side, we got our ground wire attached to the bottom lug on our meter panel, so that way our generator is grounded to our service. You take the other end of the plug, just like that. Like I said, it can only go in one way. It's installed. Give it a twist so it's locked in. Get our generator started. Like I said, each generator is different. I know how to start mine. So flip on our main breaker, and we're feeding power to our breaker in the box. Alright, we're going to start cutting off all the breakers here in the garage. So it's imperative that you make sure that you've cut your main breaker, because you can't have 2 power sources coming in at the same time. So all of my sub breakers are turned off. My main breaker is now off. I turn on this breaker that I've wired in from my generator. Now I'm feeding electricity into my panel from my generator outside. There's lights in the garage. You'll notice I don't have these ones marked with a white dot, but I do have my microwave. And now my house is being, mine and Michelle's house is being powered off the grid from our generator. We can go in the house. And you'll notice all of my lights are on, my fan is on, I have power from my television. My pellet stove, you can see that the screen is lit up. That indicates that we have power. We can open up the refrigerator and see that the light is on in my refrigerator, that we know that we have power. The only thing that we're not powering is the electric furnace, the electric hot water heater, the dishwasher, but everything else, all the outlets, all the lights, everything has power. To demonstrate that my house is completely off the grid, all of my other breakers are turned on. Everything is turned on. This is the breaker that backfeeds my panel from my generator outside to my panel in the house. You'll notice all the lights are on, all the other breakers, minus my dishwasher and furnace, hot water heater, everything else. Main breaker's off, there's no power. One flip and this kills everything. Now, I never like to hit my system with a complete load, so I always turn off all of my breakers. So now you'll notice every breaker is off. I power up my main breaker. Start turning everything back on. And now my house is back on the grid. Do it the same way. Turn everything off. And I'm sure you can hear the generator outside running. Cut my main breaker. Start feeding with my generator. And our house is back off the grid. So there you have it. I kind of wrapped this all up, put everything together, but it's pretty simple. It does take a little bit of time and money, but it's pretty easy to get your house to backfeed your panel. Like I said again, it's imperative that you do not have two power sources coming into your panel. This being my generator, my power source, this being the grid, this being electric from the grid. You cannot, I say again, you cannot have power coming in from here and power coming in from here. Looking at some still photos of some of the material that I use. This first one is a grounding lug that I attach to the ground on the bottom of the meter panel. Just makes it a little bit easier to get your ground wire to attach to. This second one is a close-up photo of the 4-lug 30 amp 240 volt receptacle that I put on the house. Here's another shot of the grounding lug that I installed on the generator so I could bond the generator to the ground for the meter panel. This here is a close-up shot of the 30 amp 240 volt breaker that I installed that I'm using to backfeed the panel with. You'll pay attention to the black and the red hots that are attached to the breaker, and then behind that on the grounding bus bar is where I got my neutral and my ground bonded together. This last shot is where I knocked out the hole in the bottom of the meter or the breaker panel where I fed my 10-3 wire down through. You'll notice the little black circle. Basically that's this item right here. You cannot have Romex wire running through a metal box without it being protected. This is an easy little pop in, and you can pick it up in any of the home improvement stores. So I'm back in Washington, getting ready to go back to work tomorrow. This wraps up the video for the installation of the generator for the house down in Texas. Be mindful, if you're going to attempt something like this, please check your local code. Typically, if you're the homeowner, you do not need to be a licensed electrician. I'm not advocating for anybody to attempt something like this. I'm just showing how easy it is for a person to do something like this with a little bit of knowledge and know-how. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comments below. Thank you, and God bless.